Hi, everybody. My name's Candy Kaufman, and I'm the Telecenter Director in Fort Worth for the Texas Workforce Commission. We do the unemployment insurance claims for the state of Texas. So we're a state agency that is under a federal program umbrella, but governed by the state of Texas. So we have interesting requirements that span both federal and state. So what I would like to do now, without any further ado, is turn it over to the driver of this event. And let's get started. Go ahead, David.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone. It's good to see everyone again today. And we're going to talk about an interesting topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and that's dealing with the whole topic of measurements and data collection. So the title here is You Can Only Manage What You Measure. And just to give you a little quick background, I've been in the call center world for about 30 years, and part of my time I spent at Walt Disney World. And I was actually hired by Walt Disney World to run some of their internal call centers and work there for a while and have the opportunity to do both IT internal centers as well as work with their reservation center. So I'm gonna start by just a quick little poll. So what we want to know is, how do you guys think you're doing in the area of measurements? So I've got 4 options here, and then we'll pull up a poll. 1, great, meaning we are collecting the right amount of data, and the second part of that, we use it to improve our operation. And secondly, good, we collect the right data, but maybe we don't use it to improve our operation as well as we could. And then, okay, we get some data, but we need to gather more, and poor, we're just really not doing great in this area. If we want to go ahead and launch our poll there. So as you look at the results here, most of you, are a big, heavy majority, said you're doing good. I mean, you got the right data, but maybe don't always use it. And that's really what I have found out there with a lot of my clients. So what I want to do, we'll stop sharing this now. And I'm just going to walk through a little case study for when I was first hired at Disney. So I was recruited and came to Disney, I had a call center background, and they had an IT support center. So it was internal IT support. So it's whether it's a front desk at a resort or any of the back office functions, it was the PC LAN support center. And we employed mainly, when I first got there, they were certified Microsoft engineers. So pretty high tech people running the call center. And so I was asked to come in. And when I first got there, they were running about 20-minute hold times during the peak parts of the day, which is, you can imagine if you're an end customer waiting in front of someone that's trying to call a help desk to get some help on a computer problem, 20 minutes isn't a good thing. So I was told, as some of you could probably relate to, David, we need to fix this and fix it quick. And by the way, you don't get any more budget. So I don't know if any of y'all have ever heard that in your call centers, but they told me I had to fix the problem and stay within my current budget. So the first thing I did was start asking, all right, let me see your data. And they looked at me and said, data, what do you mean? And they were not at the time collecting really any call center metrics. So I started collecting data, and for a little while we collected data. I'm just going to share, these are actually scans from some of my original little sheets that I had. And so this is just one of the things we put together, was looking at the hold times. And I'm going to draw attention to a particular date. So October 1st is the date we implemented a first round of major changes as a result of some of the work that we've done analyzing the data. So you'll see as we walk through these, a definite reduction in hold times starting at October 1st. And so this measures some of the hold times and some of the call volume information. This chart shows our abandonment percentage, which was still pretty high. And our goal then was to get to where we had less than 1 or 2% abandonment. And looking at the next year, our call volumes, these were some of our projections of what we anticipated our call volume doing on a weekly and monthly basis. And then we looked at, okay, well, how are the calls coming in? So I started asking questions. All right, we're open a 24-hour operation, or it was up until 7 a.m. we started, and you look at some of these agents and these call volumes, and you could see that mid-morning we spiked, and then people took their lunch break, and then we went up again. And so that was important for me to look at. And then we looked at, what day a week is our busiest. And we looked at some of our call volumes, and the Tuesday was the busiest. I started asking questions. Why is Tuesday the busiest day? And it turned out the IT department rolled out all changes on Monday nights. And so I didn't know that when I first started there, but that's why we ended up getting a little bit higher call volume. Then we look at how long was it taking us to close our tickets that we would open. And that was another whole area we measured. And then finally, I looked at, okay, what kind of calls are coming in? And keep in mind, I had most of my agents, if not all of them, were pretty high dollar certified Microsoft engineers. And as you can see from this, about 30–40% were pretty menial tasks, a lot of them being password issues. And so we started looking at that, and I said, well, that doesn't make sense. So through attrition, I was able to take, one or two of those people that had left and hire for the same dollar amount, 3 people that would be thrilled to come in and do password resets. And that did 2 things for me. One, it allowed me to have to specialize certain agents in certain areas, but it also made those people that were the more experienced people, it gave them, they didn't have to mess with some of those trivial type areas. So it kind of increased their job satisfaction. And so we were able to make some changes, and we made 4 or 5 big changes in the way we staff. Looking at the time of day charts, we just made sure that no one was on break when we hit our peak periods, and we just adjusted some of the way we did. And we went, again, with no additional dollars, went from a 20-minute hold to an average of 2 during our worst period, just by using data. And so that's kind of the key point there is data is so key when you're looking at a call center and what you're measuring. And I know everyone here probably has your own metrics and looking at that. And then kind of the ultimate final was my balanced scorecard that we created. And you can see this is back from 1998. So this is a few years ago. But we picked our 8 key measurements. And you can see most of them are some of the ones we've already talked about. And then there's one in there that was the labor cost per call. So we were able to measure that and track that. And again, for those of you who've done balanced scorecards, the whole reason here is you've got things that are in tension with each other. So you've got things that if I was just going to focus on hold time and things like that, I could go staff, but then that would throw my labor cost per call out of whack. So we had to always be balancing that. And so we would produce this scorecard every month. We would grade them and weight them and then produce an overall. And this is something we shared with the whole organization and allowed us to kind of be held accountable for what we were doing. So that's just kind of a real high level story of my initial engagement at Disney and what we did with the big call center there. And I'm going to turn it over to Candy and have Candy, why don't you share some of your thoughts on data gathering and measurements at the Workforce Commission?
Well, sure. I mean, the thing about having a call center is that there's a lot of data out there. Your ACD system is going to collect a lot of information, but you have to determine what's important and what information that's really telling you so that you can make good business decisions. You all know that. One of the things that is unique about our organization is that we have to report to the Texas legislators. Now, they don't want to see a whole bunch of data. So they've picked one that matters to them the most. And we're held to that requirement of average speed to answer. And we don't have competition. We're a state agency in which we are the only place you go to in the state of Texas to get an unemployment insurance claim filed and resolved, and we deal with employers and people who have lost their job. So our average speed to answer is really not going to be driven by trying to keep customers, if you follow what I'm saying. So what we try to do is manage our call volume throughout a week time period, knowing that anybody who calls in on Monday, when it's the busiest, when everybody's trying to reach us on a Monday, their problem or issue can be deferred within that week. So we use what is called deflex, managed deflex. We will set a threshold and say, we're not going to accept any more calls when our threshold meets such and such. And we're going to give them a message telling him that, the caller, that they need to call back at a later time. What that does is it helps control our average speed to answer average, because the deflex are managing the top end of that average speed to answer. We're not going to allow people to hold an excessive amount of time when their call can be handled much quicker later in the week, because our call volume is really, really heavy on Mondays and less so, progressively down so from the rest of the week. So the other thing that we measure is unique callers. So let me just use the pandemic as an example. That was just an insane period of time for us. But, we may have had 2 million attempts in a day, which we did, over 2 million attempts to reach our call center in a day. But the unique number of callers was a much smaller number than that, because people were doing automatic redials. So some of the things that we collect and measure are a way of explaining to the Texas legislators, as well as media, when they want to know, during the pandemic, we were hot news all the time. What's going on with the unemployment, because everybody needed an unemployment claim back then. And so we're able to explain a lot of information using the data that we had collected. But then, as you drill down, you can get down into like agent stats. And I'm really careful about making sure that what I'm sharing to the agents regarding their stats are valuable and important for improving behaviors that they have. And I'm going to use average handle time as an example. If we do not use average handle time to communicate to our agents, because that if we tell them you must answer a call or complete a call within X number of minutes, because our calls can go quite lengthy. I don't want them looking at their watch or clock and saying, I'm sorry, this is all the time I have for you, or using behaviors that are going to interfere with the quality of the call. So we do not share average handle time. So you have to be careful what you communicate, so that you make sure that you're not driving behaviors that are going to be unacceptable. And so that's just kind of like a big blurb of a lot of things that I have to say about how we operate within our organization. I'll turn it back to you, David.
All right, thanks, Candy. And yeah, as you look at that, and I would agree on handle time. We gather that information and we use it, but the way we use handle time is not to tell an agent, a specific agent, to work on something, but we look at it and say, is there a particular agent that's maybe outside of the average?
That's right.
Significant percentage.
Yes.
And if we see someone that's consistently either higher or lower, to be honest, than the average, then we want to, sample some of their calls and try to find out what's going on with them. But again, I'm always telling my call center managers, folks, we don't want to push the handle time, because that's the last thing. I'm a very much focus on customer service, not on the stats and the handle time. So, but we do use that information. It is still important. So I'm going to go now to just a few other statistics, and just some of the basic ones. And I'm sure everyone probably has some variation, but I'll just talk briefly on these. So calls by queue. So, measuring how are calls coming in. If you have an IVR and ACD, splitting calls out in based on certain areas, or even different phone numbers. Some of my call centers, I had a national call center that was roadside assistance, and they did all the third-party call center work for Lamborghini, for Ford, for all those programs. And every one of our programs had their own number, so we could track inbound call volume that way. But the calls by time of day, and that's important, mainly just so you can make sure your staffing is set correctly. And same thing with day of week. We had one change we made at Disney is because we had such a low volume on Fridays, we made it optional and actually encouraged some of our agents to go to a 4-10 work schedule. And that way we could staff up Monday through Thursday very heavily and have, 4 or 5 of the, percentage or a few of the agents off on Friday to allow us to increase during the peak times. And then the calls by type. So, across queues, what is the main reason for the call and what are the reasons there? And that allows us to really make sure we've got the right type of people answering the calls. And then abandonment percentage, this is something that I think is one of the core ones that I always look at. And I break this one down into what I call short abandonment and long abandonment. And the way I use it for most of my clients, we have short abandonment, anyone who hangs up within 2 minutes. And my thought on that is if they're not available to, they may have called thinking maybe I can just grab someone real quickly. And, if they're not available to wait at least 2 minutes, I'm less concerned about that than I am someone who waits more than 2 minutes and goes into what I call long abandonment. So I track those separately and report on those. And then obviously your handle time, we've already talked about. Your average speed to answer is a key one. And I track that in not only the average, but the maximum over a period. So I've got, thresholds for the average, but then I also say I don't under any circumstance want someone to hold more than X amount of minutes or whatever it might be. And then we look at, some of my clients, their end clients require that they report things like what percentage of the calls are answered within 30 seconds. So we are able to track that. And then we start getting into all the call stats by agent. So we can break it out and know how many calls each agent's taken, what are they doing, how are they handling calls, what do their times look like, and then if there's a ticket involved, if it's not a one and done type call situation, then we track closing tickets. So I want to just pause for a minute there, and in addition to these, in your chat box, if you want to put in your chat box what are some of the additional measurements that maybe you capture that we haven't already talked about here. So go ahead and open up your chat box there. All right. Seeing security level. Okay. Seeing some good comments there. Yep. Percentage calls handled, especially in an inbound sales area. You don't want to let those potential sales call. And then service level versus average speed of answer. So, how close, and I do that also with several of these, the big difference there is what percentage of your call volume is within your agreed upon service levels for your clients, and how do you track that? Any others there? Let's see, we've got requeuing calls, escalation percentage. That is another good one. There's a percentage of calls that are escalated. I was just on the call a couple hours ago with one of my call centers down in the Philippines, and we were talking about escalation. And first contact resolution, that's a good one. And we're going to talk about the customer side of it here on the next slide here in just a minute, but several of y'all are mentioning that. And yeah, first call resolution, that's a good one in looking at that. So as you're looking at that, those are some great additional ones that we didn't have specifically called out in ours. But when you look at the second category of stats or data gathering, really I call it customer statistics. So these are things, and this is where I want to open it up for some dialogue and some discussion on this. And I really want to know things like, when and how do you gather information from your customers? Because there's lots of ways to do it. There's immediately after a call, there's follow-up surveys. So go ahead and unmute yourselves if you've got some thoughts on that, on when and how do you gather customer statistics? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
Randomly following all types of interactions, post-call, post-email, post-chat.
Okay. And what mechanism do you use to gather that feedback? Are you sending them an online email survey? Or are you
post-call may start with a post-call survey at the end of the conversation. And if that doesn't work, depending on who it is, it could be an email follow-up for a second attempt or SMS.
Okay. Yep. Good.
I think one of the biggest mistakes we see with clients is that they are not they're giving the power to the agent to determine when this is being deployed rather than randomizing it, which really devalues that data.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, if you've had a bad interaction, you're not going to say, hey, would you mind taking a survey? So, all right, someone else?
So we, when I worked at Intuit, we actually did a survey after every call. We actually surveyed 100% of the phone calls, and any of the surveys that came back that were the call resolution was low or it was past a certain threshold, the coaches and the managers would actually call each of those customers back and gather information with a conversation, and if we needed to set up a call back to get their issue resolved. So we did both, but particularly the callbacks were a really big thing for us to gather additional information on why we weren't actually serving customers really well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and having that management team or a QA team that's assigned to do that, that's great. Right? Who else? Who else? How do you gather your customer, your CSAT data?
We measure ours through a post-call email. That's a pretty basic. It's just one question for kind of an NPS response and one question for CSAT. We do the same thing at the end of a chat interaction, where it's actually in the chat. They're offered the survey right at the end of the chat. And then finally, I would say that we are leveraging complaint data. So we log all complaints, whether they come in by mail or if they're expressed over the phone, we pour over the information that we get through customer complaints.
Right. Anyone else? So
How's MedMutual deal with it? Jonathan, Prometheus, anybody?
We have a automatic survey that after an interaction with a member that the member will speak with and answer 5 questions through like an automated system.
Yeah. That's how we get our CSAT, and we coach our agents on it, look at outliers, and like I think someone mentioned that excuse me, if it's negative input, we make that call back right away. So that's how we measure customer satisfaction.
Great. Well, and I want to just have a little discussion around Net Promoter Score. So I've talked on this before, I believe, on one of these calls over the years, but I'm not a huge fan of Net Promoter Score, and let me just share a few reasons why. One is a 10-point scale gives way too much arbitrariness to the responses. Depending on what kind of mood I'm in, I might give someone a 7 or a 9, and I might have had the exact same experience. And so looking at that, but probably the thing that I have the biggest challenge with is so many organizations focus only on their aggregate Net Promoter Score. And they're not looking at things like what led to that. What are the comments? What are the feedback? I've been in companies that part of their town hall meeting every month, that's what they flash up a big screen on. This is our NPS score for the month. But it doesn't lead to any improvement in anything. So, Net Promoter Score can be used effectively if it's not used in isolation. It's just the score. And you do also look at comments and other feedback that come in. But so many companies are going to just a single thing. And just because, Harvard Business Review came up with this years ago and started promoting it, it became the popular thing to do for everyone. Everyone has to have a Net Promoter Score. But again, I just caution everyone to be real careful how you use it. If you're going to use a Net Promoter Score, that it's not used in isolation, and that you share more than just the score with your agents and your employees so they can improve what they do. So that's kind of my controversial statement of the presentation. I'll open that up for some dialogue and see how you guys use NPS and what do you do with it.
David, I love what you said there about it's not the score, it's the comments, it's the themes, it's the action. That's the important thing. The score is somewhat arbitrary, like you said. Perhaps the score trend is relevant, but the absolute number is really meaningless. And so I don't actually get too deep into the debate on whether it's NPS or CSAT or whatever. It's just whatever you use it consistently, but then understand what is supporting that. And you may not be able to get the customer to tell you directly what that is. You're going to have to use other things like observing their behavior, observing how they're reacting on social media, and other themes that help drive what you believe that score to be. But certainly if you're asking for a score, by all means, at the very least be asking someone or give them the opportunity to say, why did you rate us this way? So you can get to those themes.
Nope. Perfect. Who else? Who else has a comment on a net promoter score?
Yeah, I think the part of it too is you look at the net promoter score. And I just realized I don't even have my video on. I think what's happened over the years is that corporate people have become educated on the net promoter score. So what we're hearing is, you go out to a store and now the community and the customer base is educated that they think that if anything under an 8 is a detractor. So now they know the numbers, right? So in the past where someone might have said, oh, absolutely, it's 10 out of 10, they know that now 8's just good enough. So I think that's the difference in corporations and organizations using net promoter score, that your customer base now sees that if they give you less than an 8, it's kind of sticking it to you, right? In a call center environment, because they know that it comes across as a detractor. The worst part is when they're giving you a 4, but not giving any comments for it.
Very good comments, good thoughts on that. And yeah, I agree. It's very arbitrary on what the score is and how they're scoring you. And again, I'll respond differently depending on what kind of mood I might be in at the time. And that's not an accurate measure. I typically, and I do a lot of survey work, have for 30 years, I typically use a 4-point scale. And I want to define exactly why someone is picking each of the 4 points. So it's very clear when I get that information. But looking at and you made a good comment, Rick, also, it's also important, we haven't really talked about this, but the trend lines is another big part of data gathering. How are we doing? Are we improving? Are we not? And I had one client that we started capturing some basic data, and one of the elements we measured was the speed of communication and how quickly people got back. This is a manufacturing client when something was in for service. And we saw that, it was like, wow, that's a horrible score initially. And so we implemented some changes, and it was really cool to see over the next 6 months, our scores, hundreds and hundreds of responses coming in on that question. Our scores improved, and it validated that, okay, we're moving in the right direction. So Rick, I think your comment there on looking at trend lines is really an important part of any data gathering and any measurements there.
Hey, David, this is Adam. I have a quick question around customer effort score. Somebody asked, what that really was. Have you done any work on that? From the studies I've seen, Net Promoter Score is, was the big one about, 15 years ago, right? When that first came out, everybody was super excited about it. But then when customer effort score started coming out, they recognized it was a much better predictor of customer behavior. Both from a sales perspective as well as, kind of customer loyalty, the triggers related to that. Because, with motor score, you can have some of your detractors still said that they would come back to you. And some of the promoters said, no, they'd leave you for $1, so it really wasn't a great indicator, but customer effort was a much better predictor of that. Is the group familiar with that, or is that something you've done some studying around?
I'll let someone else answer first. Brian, I think you were saying something. No. Nope. Okay. No, I agree that is a better measurement. But again, to the comment, let me kind of launch from that question right into my next thought, because it ties exactly in there. There's really 2 pieces of data. There's scores, there's the quantifiable data, and then you've got your comments. And so many people, I don't know whether it's just out of time or lack of time, they focus only on the scores and something they can tabulate quickly, and they don't have an organized process to review and look at comments. And I'd say it's 50-50. I get value out of those. And let me give you a real life example. I had one of my clients that I helped implement a QA process, and we hired a new QA manager, and we were doing surveys. And I was monitoring them for a few weeks while I was training this QA manager. And I saw a survey response come in, and we had set it up to automatically, when it hit certain score levels, on a 4-point scale, if it was a less than a 3, it triggered an automatic alert to one of the managers to review it. But I was looking at it and I was watching this, and I read some of the comments, and they were very upset about how a recent transaction was handled. And I immediately, within probably 30 minutes, I just happened to be watching it at the moment, was able to get someone on the phone at the company. They called that client, they worked through it, they resolved the issue. And you know what that client told me later when I followed up with them? And this was, by the way, $1 million client for this particular large company. They said I was within 2 days of taking my business to your competitor if I didn't hear from you.
Nice catch.
And I was like, wow, that's kind of scary that if we didn't have something in place there. But so that's really key to look at your comments. And for all my clients that I set up processes like this, every week we have a meeting where we get together and we are looking at the scores, but we're also looking at trends and comments. What are the themes that we're seeing? And what can we do about it? What are some action items? And we build it out, and we use Salesforce quite a bit to create tasks and open cases for people to work on particular issues. And it's really just more about looking at not just the numbers, but what are you doing with it? And so that kind of, I'll pause there for a second. Any thoughts on that before I go into kind of how we respond to feedback?
Yeah, so that metric is a little controversial because we hold our advisors accountable for it, but it is feedback. I think what Adam was describing earlier, which is why I was asking the questions for clarity, but it is to get feedback from our merchants on how easy it was to get through a process, or the explanation, or did we, satisfy their questions. So all of this for me, because I come from a workforce management background, I'm not necessarily in ops, but I'm here because I want to learn more about those kinds of things and grow. I have jotted down as things I want to go back and learn more about. We do correlation, right? So we look at ease of effort, CSAT, we look at FCR, and when it comes to handle time, I almost cringed when I heard you guys don't look at handle time, but I know why. I need that for planning purposes, right? But I also understand that low handle time doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing, because your FCR might be really bad, or your CSAT scores aren't where you need to be. So I do look at all of those when I'm measuring the success of a contact center.
And Jesse, yeah, go ahead, Candy.
I was going to say, we absolutely do look at handle time. I was saying that we don't make it part of the agent's evaluation.
Right.
Correct.
Communication.
Yeah, I know. I knew what you
Yeah.
meant.
Yeah.
And I know they get on scorecards, then they get removed from scorecards, and they'll be on scorecards and get removed. And those are where
we
I'm
never
like,
put it
oh.
on.
Yeah, it's really it's an important goal for us as the managers, right?
Right.
Jesse, related to workforce, it's a critical measurement for us, right? But from the agent perspective, I think to Candy's point, they're kind of, if it's a goal of theirs, then it turns out they start managing to the clock versus the customer, right?
Sure.
But
Right.
if it's what I actually sent a response, and I thought I was sending it to everybody, but it went to David directly. Sorry about that, David. But in my world, handle time is actually a result of their interaction capabilities, right? How well can they, interact with that customer and control that call and get those problem resolved, right? So that's their goals, and the goal should be the things that drive that interaction. So they should get better at call control. They should get, those are the goals, right? They should get better at the handling of the customer. And or even knowledge of their system and how well that they can quickly get to it. But on the back end of that, the result for us is handle time, and that's the one we use to measure.
Yeah. I agree.
Adam, you bring up a really great point, though. What you're talking about is it's about the behaviors. The scores are just indicators of what the behaviors are,
Right.
and then how you help with the behaviors.
Totally.
And that is April, that is exactly what we communicate back to the agent. Is we'll talk to them about specific behaviors that we've identified that result in a high average handle time, or sometimes even a low average handle time, the outliers from that. But we don't introduce it as your call times are too high or too low. What we talk about is we've identified that you enter into extra conversation that is not related to the business needs of the call. That's a behavior, or, something else that ties into that result. But the only thing communicated to them are those behaviors. And when we get a little bit further into this slide presentation, we'll get into what those evaluating behaviors are. So, but I agree with you, April.
One last comment before we move on. I'm sorry to keep throwing stuff in there, but going back to your point around the reasons why people are providing feedback, whether it be you know, they were dissatisfied or satisfied, either way. There's a lot of times there's like a stated response, like a stated opinion, but sometimes there's kind of an implied opinion as well. And getting kind of a second look at that to say, okay, they were really upset with the agent, but it really was a policy thing, or it really was a training thing, or whatever, you know, that helps you create it to become more actionable insights versus just a score.
Nope, very much. And that's a great lead into kind of these final comments on this slide. And this is where this is my kind of pet peeve with data gathering. If you're not going to do something with the information, then why waste your time? You know, so, you know, do you have a process in place where you use that data and you interact with the operations side of the house and you're feeding that information, whether it's a product, a service, whatever it might be? Are you using that information to improve things? Are you making changes based on what you see in the feedback from your customers? And, you know, that's a key piece of this. And then, you know, I'd say the number one rule of customer feedback gathering, if you don't have a plan to use and respond to the customer feedback, then don't ask for it. You know, don't bother them. And then I want to talk just real briefly. I'm going to share a little bit about this. We could probably have a whole separate session on QA and QA scorecards, but I'm just going to share, and I'm going to pull up QA scorecard. So this is something I've developed over the years that I use with agents, and everyone's probably got a version of this. But my QA departments then will sample calls and they'll listen to calls. And then what I do is I've got certain things at the top here that are critical or immediate fail. So if they don't hit these, then they fail their scorecard. And then I have a weight associated with each item. It's either a high, medium, or low. And then I have whether they completely did it, they partially did it. So they didn't completely forget it, but they partially did it. And then no, they didn't do it at all, or it's not applicable possibly to that call. And then it kind of auto calculates and gives you your points. And then I got over here, this is an explanation of what we're looking for in that particular evaluation category. And so you can see we've got, you know, everything from the opening of the call, establishing rapport, the call handling, knowledge use information, the closing of a call. And then we have a spot down here where they can put specific coaching opportunities for that agent on that call. And these are something, and then I get together with my QA person and the managers, and we do a calibration every week we listen to 2 calls, that's it, in the calibration. And we're making sure that we're all kind of on the same page as far as how we're scoring things and what we're doing. So they may come back and say that someone passed something. And I said, oh, absolutely not. That person, you know, was interrupting constantly during the call. And this is why I would rate it no, and make sure that we're all kind of looking at it the same way. So I just wanted to kind of just throw that out there, that's a whole nother area of measurement that we haven't really gone into in detail, but you know, your sample rates, you know, and I'm curious how frequently people use QA sampling and what you have for your auto fail item. So I'll just open that up for a little discussion for a minute or two. If how frequently do you, and what's your sample rate for your QA process?
David, I have a quick question. When you guys do the QA on the call, does the manager then go and show the agent and walk them through? Is this QA card used by the agents?
Yes, the agents see this and they see this, and yes, after each QA, the manager is then going to go sit down with that person and go over their QA scores. That's part of their monthly process. They go and sit down with them and look at it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dave. This could probably be a whole nother town hall, because I love this topic. You know, one of them though, it's interesting because I used to have a scorecard just like this when I was working at MCI, and all of a sudden we'd be hitting these numbers and it was like, life's good. And then the VP would walk in and, you know, do a spot monitoring session and, you know, have a terrible call. And he'd be like, I don't believe your scores because, you know, I just listened to one call and it sucked. So, you know, you're 90% or whatever you're hitting. I don't believe it. And what was really interesting is we ended up overhauling. We spent a lot of time on this when we overhauled our scorecard down to basically, you know, 3 questions, and had a very different process in really collaborating with the agent themselves and having them monitor themselves. and having a real collaborative discussion around that. That ended up turning things around completely. So, definitely a whole topic for another day, but interesting stuff.
Yep, the QA process is a big one. Anyone else? How frequently do you do sampling, and how many calls per agent do you do per month?
We do eight per month per agent. And we look at the call holistically between doing it right and using the right kind of expected language in the phone call, greeting, closing, whether they verified correctly or not. So we do 8. We do have some capabilities in our speech analytics tool to auto QA portions of the call, and then the QA auditors are able to kind of round out those audits.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on the QA process and your sample rates?
I would just follow on what Matt just said. I mean, and we all have probably heard or possibly using some of the tools out there today that allow for 100% QA. So I've been in this industry 30 years, so I'm used to the old school method, and I still really like the old school method, and I think it's dangerous, in my opinion, to only rely upon auto QAs, and especially if you're not calibrating. But I love, kind of as Matt alluded to, these days technology is a lot different, and you can do a lot more. And if you hybridize and use the QA approach and the automated approach, and you still focus on calibrations and still accept the importance of calibrations, that to me is where you can get the best of both worlds and not worry about such a small sampling rate. Because why do we have such small sample rates? It's all driven by cost of those resources, or else we would do more sampling.
Right.
So I challenge folks, and I challenge my teams all the time when I ran a BPO. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we doing such a small amount? How can we do it differently?
Well, I think, to your point, it is all about resources. But one of the things that I also use is when we get scores that come in from a CSAT survey, if they're below a certain level, that triggers an automatic QA review of that call. And so that way we can capture, maybe, ultimately what you're trying to do is keep things from slipping through the cracks, identify poor agent behaviors and correct them quickly, and move on. You're not, if you trying to listen to every single call manually is impossible, as everyone knows. So just trying to get in and understand what's going on with the calls, and focusing on the ones where you need to learn something from and improve. And even during my calibration, even on the ones that I'm just cringing, I can't believe that agent just said that to that person. I'm cringing at the response. I always look at it, it's an opportunity to teach and learn with that agent, and to look at that. And most of the time I found, when I was in the coaching role years ago, when I play that call, I hardly had to say anything, because the agent's going to listen to it and said, I can't believe I handled it that way. And they pretty much know whether it was good or bad. Sometimes some of them don't get it, but most of them do. Any other comments, thoughts on this before we kind of go into wrap up mode here on the?
The only thing I wanted to say too was around those calls, what we're seeing in terms of best practice is that it's not necessarily just 8 random calls, but we're wanting to, of course, spread it out over the month. And also looking at shorter calls versus longer calls to see if there are key learnings, within that as well. That's really important. And one of the other things that, and I know we're a little different in the way that we support it as a consultant and a third-party vendor monitoring business. But we work with businesses and recommend that they move away from a quality score. They get a quality rating, because what happens is the people that get a certain score they always fly under the radar and receive less of that behavioral coaching that I heard one of you talking about earlier. Versus if you look at this rating and for the behaviors, are they connecting? Are they, listening actively and responding appropriately? Are they taking the customer out of the middle? Those kinds of things. And you provide that rating. What we've come to find is that you'll have agents that call attention to certain situations where they'll say, okay, I need my supervisor, I need quality to listen to that call that I just took after lunch today, because I hate when I'm in that situation. I hate when I get an emotional person and I need help with that versus being versus sitting there praying, oh my goodness, I hope this call isn't listened to.
Right.
It just tends to change the culture a little bit.
I think you got a great point there. And I always tell the QA people, it's not about a hand slap. It's not about reprimanding. It's about what can we learn and how can we grow and how can we get better at this? And when they have that attitude, it really makes a difference. So
Yeah, I'll just add, that's one of the things. Thanks, Vicki, for that segue, because we at Medical Mutual moved to a scoreless QA about 4.5 years ago. And it changed the culture. It changed the way our reps handle. It's non-scripted. We look at trends and opportunities and we celebrate successes. So that's the approach that we moved towards. I'm gonna say almost 5 years ago, went to a scoreless QA. We get our reps get 4 calls, but we also look at our short call. We get a short call report. So we look at that on a monthly basis to see if we pick up anything, but it's all trend-based coaching. There's no score. You're not chasing the number. So I think we talked about, if you put a number out there, people chase a number.
Yes.
If you focus on behaviors and trending in the right direction and have your coaching towards that, that's what we do at Medical Mutual. And when we went from a scored QA process to a scoreless, the attitude of our employees just changed. The willingness to coaching, everything changed. The calibrations changed. So that's what we do. I know, like you said, someone said quality could be a whole topic, but
good.
I just want to share some insight on what we do at Medical Mutual regarding quality.
And just one final comment on the QA. It's also real important that your QA and your training teams are linked. So as our QA does their work, they send over to the training team who coordinates our weekly huddles with our agents. These are the 3 or 4 things we've heard on calls this week we need to focus on and improve. And so they're constantly feeding. The QA gives the stuff to training. Training develops a little 5-minute module on it that they're going to train in the weekly huddle that we have. And so we're constantly using that data out of QA to feed the training program. We have another poll here. Just this is a multi-select. So pick all the different measurements that your organization currently gathers. You can scroll down through the poll there if you want. Yeah, I think most people there, it's almost all that.
Yeah, it's all collected. And I think one of the points is we collected at the manager, director, and above level, but not all the reps see that information, but it's all collected.
Yep, Jillian, you want to close it and share it real quick? So you can kind of see, almost everyone gathers just about everything there.
Now you can go to final comments. I mean, I have a final comment.
Go for it, Dave. I'll turn it back over to you. And again, everyone, I appreciate being able to share some thoughts on this topic.
Thank you.
Jillian, before these people, screenshot if you can, because I'm seeing Adam and Vicki and Amethyst. I think they just signed up for a town hall on scorecards. I'm pretty sure when I get done editing the audio, it's going to sound exactly like put me in. So, one of the funny things about town halls, and these have evolved over the last 2.5 years, is that at first it was kind of a novelty, right? It's kind of cool getting to see people. And then you had the off-screen people who were chatting more than the on-screen people. And then you had the people who were camera ready at all times, right? I mean, they just want to be a part of the show. Then the conversation started to become an important part of this whole deal, right? And then the topics became more driven by members. And then the conversation became driven by members, as evidenced today and last month and the previous month. And that's kind of the evolution of this whole thing. So I want to thank David and Candy for letting us volunteer you But I do want to encourage others to say, hey, look, these topics are important to us, and I'll be glad to drive a conversation on this. It doesn't have to be heavy lifting. Great slides today and great sharing on that, David and Candy. But it could be one slide. It can go any which way you want it to go. And I think we also broke the record on how much conversation's happening on the chat channel versus live and ready for action. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to jump in today, we'll make sure all the chat recorded content and all the recordings from the session today are provided on the Slack channel. Jillian, that's where we get it posted. Do I have that right? Usually within 24 or 48 hours?
Yep, the recording will go in the Slack channel, and then at some point, once we get our website back up and running as it should be with able to update videos, it'll be on there too in the future, but that's in a few months. But on the Slack channel, if you need help accessing the Slack channel, just shoot me an email, jillian@ccng.com.
Perfect. Anything else, David or Candy, before we say goodbye and thank you both?
No, thank you, everybody, for all your great comments and feedback. And I think we've got some more topics for a future town hall meeting to delve into even.
I'm good.
All right, everyone. Great
Yeah.
call today. Thanks for your time. Thanks for participating. We'll get you all that content here shortly, but thanks everybody. Great
Yeah.
session today.
Great job.
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.